12-year-old Jonelle Matthews disappeared from her home in Greeley in 1984.
Nearly 4 decades after Jonelle Matthews was first reported missing, her murderer has now been found guilty. Behind me, Steve Pankey was found guilty on 3 charges connected to the 1984 disappearance.
A man spent 37 years writing a 12-year-old girl's name into thousands of documents, ran for governor twice, called the FBI himself, and still almost got away with it. The 20th of December 1984, Greeley, Colorado, 8:15 in the night. A car pulls up to a house on 3243rd Avenue Court. A 12-year-old girl climbs out of the back seat, waves goodbye to her friend, and walks up the driveway. The driver watches her until she reaches the front door. The foyer light flickers on, the universal signal between kids and parents in a small town. I'm in. I'm safe. The driver pulls away. Inside, the space heater is running. The Christmas tree is lit. Jonelle Matthews kicks off her shoes, sets them neatly on the floor in front of her favorite spot on the couch, and drapes her shawl across the back. She had just performed in her school's holiday concert. Christmas was 5 days away. She was home. 70 minutes later, she was gone. No broken windows, no signs of a struggle. Not a single neighbor reported hearing anything unusual. Just a pair of small shoes sitting perfectly on the floor, a heater still running, and footprints in the fresh snow outside the living room window. Footprints that someone had tried to erase with a garden rake pulled from the Matthews' own garage. Jonelle Matthews would stay missing for 35 years, and the man responsible spent every single one of those years calling the FBI, filing court documents. This is her story. Before we go further, if you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every week on this channel, we cover real cases, real families, and real justice. Now let's get into it. Jonelle Matthews was born February 9, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California. Her biological mother was just 8 years old at the time, a child herself, and made the painful decision to place Jonelle for adoption within weeks of her birth. A Colorado couple, Jim and Gloria Matthews, adopted her shortly after. They already had a daughter, Jennifer, and by all accounts the family was close, warm, and deeply rooted in their faith. They settled in Greeley, a mid-sized city about 60 miles north of Denver. The kind of place where families were active in their church, kids knew their neighbors, and nobody locked their doors in the middle of the day. Jonelle fit right in. Her friends described her as loud, theatrical, and hilarious. The kind of kid who treated everything like a performance and made everyone around her feel it too. She sang in her school choir, performed in church skits, and spent her free time having sleepovers and obsessing over the boy band Menudo. Her father, Jim, was principal of Platte Valley Elementary School. Her mother, Gloria, worked at a local restaurant. By December 1984, Jonelle had been dealing with a cold for several days. Most kids her age would have used that as an excuse to stay home. Not Jonelle. She had Christmas gifts to hand out to friends she wouldn't see for weeks. And more importantly, she had been selected to perform with the Franklin Middle School Honor Choir at their annual holiday concert. She practically begged her parents to let her go. Jim and Gloria agreed, with one condition: come straight home after the concert and rest. Jonelle promised, and off she went. The concert was held at a local Intrawest Bank branch that evening, and was even broadcast on a local cable channel. Jonelle performed with her classmates, sang Christmas carols, laughed with her friends. Her close friend Deanna Ross was there too. After the show, Deanna's father Russell offered to drive Jonelle home. That car ride was the last ordinary moment of her life. Russell pulled up to the house at around 8:15 p.m. Jonelle climbed out, said goodbye to Deanna, wished her a Merry Christmas, and walked up to the front door. Russell didn't pull away immediately. He waited, the way parents do in small towns. He watched until the foyer light came on. Then he drove away. He had no idea he was the last person, other than her killer, to ever see Jonelle Matthews alive. At approximately 8:30 p.m., the house phone rang. A teacher from Jim's school was calling to say he wouldn't be in the next morning. Jonelle answered, took a message, and that was it. Polite, responsible, completely routine. That phone call is the last confirmed contact with Jonelle Matthews. Whatever happened inside that house happened between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. Jim had been at his older daughter Jennifer's basketball game that evening. Gloria was out of state, caring for her sick mother. When Jim pulled into the driveway just before 9:30, he expected to find Jonelle on the couch, maybe watching TV, maybe already half asleep. What he found instead was a house that looked like she had just been there. The heater was on. The television was still playing. Her shawl was draped across the back of the couch. Her shoes were placed neatly on the floor, right in front of her usual spot by the Christmas tree. Everything looked normal. But the girl who wore those shoes was not there. Jim started making calls. No one had seen her. At 10 p.m., Jennifer came home from the basketball game, walked in and called out her sister's name. No answer. Jim called the Greeley Police Department. Officers arrived within 15 minutes, and what they found outside shifted this from a welfare check to something far more serious. In the fresh snow just outside the living room windows were footprints. Large, deliberate, adult-sized footprints, positioned in a way that suggested someone had been standing there looking in. And those footprints had been partially raked over using a garden rake taken from the Matthews' own garage. No forced entry, no screams, no struggle inside the house. Someone had come to that window, watched and waited. They knew the layout. They knew where the rake was stored. They knew exactly when Jonelle would be alone. This was not random. Police initially considered the possibility that Jonelle had run away. Jim rejected it immediately. She had a sleepover planned the next day. She was performing in a Christmas presentation at church. It was 5 days before Christmas. They searched her locker in her bedroom. No note, no signs of conflict at home, no plan to leave. The runaway theory didn't survive the first week. Investigators then focused on Jim himself. It's standard procedure in cases involving missing children. Law enforcement always starts with the family. Jim understood. He cooperated fully, sat for a polygraph administered by one of the FBI's top interrogators west of the Mississippi. The agent told him he failed. Jim took another one with local police. He kept telling the same story because it was the truth. Eventually, he was cleared. Jonelle's birth mother, Terry Vera Martinez, was placed under surveillance for weeks. She hadn't been in contact with the Matthews family in over a decade and didn't even know Jonelle was missing. Another dead end. As weeks stretched into months, the community refused to let Jonelle disappear quietly. A 24-hour prayer vigil was held at local churches. Reward posters were distributed across the country. And then something happened that burned Jonelle's face into the memory of an entire nation. She became one of the first missing children in American history to have her photo printed on a milk carton. In 1985, there was no Amber Alert system, no social media, no instant notifications. A milk carton at the breakfast table was how America learned about missing kids. Jonelle's face was on cartons from coast to coast. In March 1985, President Ronald Reagan gave a speech addressing the crisis of missing children in America. He mentioned Jonelle Matthews by name, a 12-year-old girl from a mid-sized Colorado city, spoken about by the President of the United States. And still nothing moved. In May 1985, there was a brief, brutal flicker of hope. A portion of a human scalp was discovered on farmland in Weld County. Gloria Matthews was asked to examine it. She did, because that is what a mother does when that is the only option available to her. It wasn't Jonelle. The relief lasted seconds before the weight of still not knowing settled back in. The case went cold. 5 years passed, then 10. In 1994, Jim and Gloria made the devastating decision to have Jonelle declared legally dead. Gloria said publicly that they had spent a decade without a reason, without a motive, without a single answer. She asked if anyone out there knew anything. If someone could just tell them where their daughter's body was so they could bring her home. Nobody answered. Staying in Greeley became unbearable. Jim and Gloria eventually left, first to the Philippines as missionaries, then to Costa Rica in retirement. Jennifer married and moved to Washington State. But Gloria never fully left. Wherever she went, her eyes scanned crowds and searched faces. She said that in her dreams, Jonelle always came home, always walked back through the front door, smiling. In reality, that door stayed closed for 35 years. By the way, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments. I read every single one. And if this case is hitting you the way it's hitting me right now, share this video. Cases like Jonelle's deserve to be heard. Now stay with me, because this is where it gets deeply unsettling. While Greeley grieved and investigators chased dead ends, someone in that same community already knew exactly what had happened to Jonelle Matthews. Stephen Dana Pankey was 33 years old in December 1984. He lived just 2 miles from the Matthews home. He attended the same church, Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene. And on December 19th, the day before Jonelle vanished, Pankey had been arrested at a local bank for harassment and criminal trespass. His used car business had collapsed. He was in financial freefall and emotionally unraveling. The morning after Jonelle disappeared, Pankey told his wife, Angela Hicks, that they were leaving. Not in a few days, before sunrise. They were driving to Big Bear Lake, California to visit his parents. Angela had no warning, no time to prepare. The trip was sudden and completely unplanned. But the drive back to Greeley is what Angela never forgot. Pankey had strict rules in their home. No television, no radio, no newspapers, no music. He called it a godly household. Angela wasn't even permitted to drive. But on the return trip, Pankey suddenly ordered her to turn on the car radio. He wanted the news. Specifically, he was listening for any mention of a missing girl. A girl he would later claim he had never heard of. Angela flipped through stations for hours while Pankey sat and listened for every update about Jonelle Matthews. When they got back to Greeley, he drove straight past their house to a store and bought every local newspaper available. Then he made Angela read every single article about the disappearance out loud, 3 times each. Within days of returning home, Pankey changed into coveralls and rubber galoshes and started digging in the front yard. He told Angela it was a septic tank issue. Their septic tank had been replaced earlier that year. Angela had noticed no problems with it. That same week, a car stored on the property caught fire. Angela went outside to check and found Pankey standing next to the burning vehicle, holding a shovel. A sudden unplanned trip out of state. An obsession with news about a missing girl he claimed not to know. Digging in the yard with no explanation. A burning car. All of this within 1 week of Jonelle's disappearance. And then Pankey did something extraordinary. He picked up the phone and called the FBI. A month after Jonelle vanished, he walked into the Greeley Police Department claiming to be an ordained Baptist minister who had received information about the case through a pastoral confession. He said he had knowledge that could help solve it. He wanted immunity first. The police didn't give it to him, but they wrote down his name, and they started watching. Pankey and his family eventually left Greeley and settled in Twin Falls, Idaho by the late 1980s. He discovered politics, running for sheriff 3 times, then city council, lieutenant governor, and governor twice. He lost every race. In the 2018 Republican gubernatorial primary, he pulled 1.4% of the vote. But the campaigns were never really the point. Underneath the speeches and the ballot losses, Pankey was writing, constantly, obsessively, letters to attorneys, court filings, petitions to the Idaho Supreme Court, and scattered throughout all of these documents, in cases that had absolutely nothing to do with a missing girl from Colorado, were unprompted, unexplained references to Jonelle Matthews. When investigators eventually searched his home, they found documents mentioning her name. In a 1999 filing to the Idaho Supreme Court, Pankey argued that a prior conviction had been part of an effort to pressure him into becoming an informant in Jonelle's disappearance. Then he wrote something that stopped investigators cold. He said he feared he might face the death penalty for revealing the location of her body. An innocent man does not write that sentence. He also wrote a book. Found during the search of his home, its title was Graveyards. It was filled with hostility directed at Sunnyview Church of the Nazarene, the same church the Matthews family attended, and the same church that had removed Pankey from membership before the Matthews even joined. He told a police officer in the late 1990s that he had buried bodies in Colorado. He described himself in legal documents as the subject of a capital murder investigation. He referred to himself as a material witness in the Jonelle Matthews case. And nearly every letter ended the same way. Give me immunity. Give me a deal, and I'll tell you where the body is. Nobody gave him a deal. But nobody stopped listening either. There was also the matter of his cousin. A man who lived just 3 blocks from Franklin Middle School, the school Jonelle attended. That cousin had accused Pankey of cruising schools in the area. When Pankey learned during a recorded jail phone call that his cousin had died, his first reaction was to ask his sister whether those accusations would now go away. His sister said she thought so, since the cousin had been the only one making them. Pankey seemed relieved, and there was one more moment. One that said everything without saying anything at all. At Panky's own church, shortly after Jonelle disappeared, a minister stood before the congregation and declared he had received a message from God. Jonelle would be found alive and brought home safely. The congregation prayed. They held on to that hope. Stephen Panky stood up and screamed, "False prophet," at the minister. He had to be physically removed from the building. An innocent man does not react that way. July 23, 2019. A construction crew is working on a new pipeline in a remote stretch of farmland in rural Weld County, about 15 miles southeast of Greeley. Routine work, just another dig. Then the bulldozer hits something. Bones, human bones, a skull with orthodontic braces still attached, fragments of fabric, pieces of a plaid skirt, a blouse, a sweater vest. The exact clothing Jonelle Matthews was wearing the night she walked into her house and never walked out. 2 days later, the Weld County Coroner's Office confirmed it. Dental records and DNA were a match. The remains were Jonelle's. The autopsy determined the cause of death, a single gunshot wound to the head. She hadn't wandered off. She hadn't run away. She had been walked out of that house, driven to an empty field 15 miles away, and shot. Her body was found wrapped in a white bedsheet. Her coat had been partially zipped and turned inside out, with the cuffs tucked under her armpits. When investigators carefully opened those cuffs, small hand bones fell out. She had tucked her hands under her arms to stay warm. For Gloria Matthews, who had held onto the thinnest possible thread of hope for 35 years, that thread was now gone. But there was finally a new question. One Greeley had been waiting decades to ask. Who killed Jonelle Matthews? Weeks after the discovery, the Greeley Police Department announced they had a person of interest. Someone who had attended the same church as the Matthews family. Someone who had lived 2 miles from their home. Someone who had spent 35 years writing Jonelle's name into documents that had nothing to do with her. Stephen Panky. But the case against him rested on something specific. Something the public had never known about. The footprints in the snow outside the Matthews home that December night had been deliberately withheld from all media coverage. Hold back evidence. Details known only to investigators and the person responsible. Police never confirmed how those tracks were erased. They never mentioned the rake, and yet Panky had referenced it multiple times. In conversations with law enforcement over the years, he had brought up the footprints, the snow, the rake, details he had no innocent way of knowing. Angela Hicks had also found a handwritten note in the family's trash, written in Panky's own handwriting. It read, "Snow outside the Matthews house was raked." His own defense attorney would later acknowledge that piece of evidence was arguably the single strongest tie connecting Panky to the crime. On October 12, 2020, a Weld County grand jury returned an 8-page indictment against Stephen Dana Panky. First-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping of Jonelle Matthews. He was arrested in Idaho at the age of 69 and held without bail. The Matthews family flew back to Greeley. For the first time, they would sit in a courtroom and look at the man they believed had taken their daughter. The first trial began in October 2021. Prosecutors faced an immediate obstacle. 35 years in a Colorado field had left no usable DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon. This case would be built entirely on Panky's own words and conduct over nearly 4 decades. Roughly 60 witnesses took the stand. The jury heard about the rushed trip to California, the obsessive radio monitoring, the newspapers read aloud 3 times, the digging in the yard, the burning car. Angela Hicks testified about the handwritten note and about something she witnessed in 2008, 24 years after Jonelle's disappearance. At the funeral for Panky's son, who had been murdered that year, she watched Panky lean down to his son's urn and whisper a name. Not his son's name, Jonelle's. Then Panky did something no defense attorney would have advised. He took the witness stand himself. Over 2 days of testimony, he contradicted himself repeatedly. He admitted he had fabricated the pastoral confession. He admitted the story about receiving information from a third party was invented. He told the jury he had made things up out of bitterness toward the church and toward law enforcement. His defense, stripped to its core, was this: yes, I am a liar. I have been lying for 37 years, but I am not lying now. District Attorney Michael Rourke looked at him directly and asked, "Was Jonelle begging for her life when you shot her in the forehead?" Panky did not answer. His own defense attorney told the jury, "Steve Panky is kind of a jerk, it's a fact. But a jerk is not the same thing as a murderer. The jury deadlocked. A mistrial was declared on the murder and kidnapping charges. Jim and Gloria Matthews had flown back to Greeley for this. They had sat in that courtroom for weeks, watching 37 years of evidence laid out piece by piece. And when it was over, they walked out with nothing. No conviction, no closure, just the same question they had been carrying since 1984, still unanswered. Gloria was 74 years old. Jim was 77. They had already buried their daughter once, in a ceremony held without a body. Now they had to go home and wait again. The prosecution scheduled a second trial for October 2022, and this time, they had a witness they hadn't used before. Patrick Callis had been housed in the same protective custody pod as Pankey at the Weld County Jail from January to April 2021. The two men had formed a bond. They prayed together, did Bible studies together. Pankey rarely discussed his case, but one day he approached Callis and said he needed to ask for forgiveness. He asked if they could pray. Callis agreed. And then Pankey said, "I did some bad things." Callis asked if he was talking about Jonelle. Pankey nodded. They prayed. Callis asked directly if Pankey had killed her. His answer, "That's between me and God." But there was one more moment. Another inmate knocked on the wall of Callis's cell and told him to come listen. Callis moved to the front of his cell, and through the glass, he heard Stephen Pankey say 4 words. "She was dead before I crossed the railroad tracks." Callis had stayed silent after the first trial, out of a sense of spiritual loyalty to Pankey. But watching that mistrial, watching the Matthews family walk away without justice, broke through that. He wrote a letter to the district attorney. On October 31st, 2022, Halloween, the jury came back. Guilty, felony murder, second-degree kidnapping with a deadly weapon, false reporting to authorities, life in prison, earliest possible parole date, 2042. Stephen Pankey will be 91 years old. Before the sentence was handed down, the Matthews family addressed the court. Jennifer Mogensen, Jonelle's older sister, stood and told the room that 12,634 days had passed since her sister disappeared. Her husband never met his sister-in-law. Her son never met his aunt. The sibling rivalry she and Jonelle had as teenagers never got the chance to grow into an adult friendship. Pankey had taken that from her. Jim Matthews spoke next. He looked directly at Stephen Pankey and said, "You have been obsessed with your actions, and your conscience could not let you forget. You have been a prisoner of your own mind." Then he said something that silenced the courtroom. He told Pankey that despite everything, there was still time to confess his sins, that the gates of heaven were still open to him, that God was still waiting. A father who lost his daughter offering grace to the man who took her. Gloria was not in the same place. At the press conference after sentencing, she said simply, "I cannot forgive him for how he killed Jonelle. God is the only one who can forgive evil, and I feel that this is evil." Pankey spoke last. He told the room he was a Christian, that he would be in heaven, that he was innocent, and that this was not justice for Jonelle Matthews. He is currently serving his sentence at the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. He has indicated plans to appeal. Jonelle Matthews was 12 years old. She loved singing, she loved Christmas, she loved performing, and she loved her family. She was found 35 years after she disappeared, in a field 15 miles from her home, in the same clothes she wore the night. She sang Christmas carols with her school choir. It took 37 years to convict the man who killed her, but the Matthews family never stopped. Greeley never forgot, and now neither will you. If this case moved you, and I think it did, drop a comment below. Do you think Pankey will ever fully confess? Do you believe the jury made the right call convicting without DNA? And what time is it where you're watching this right now? Let me know. Subscribe if you haven't already. We cover cases just like this one every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next.